The hum of the convection oven was the only sound left in the home economics room, a steady breath of warmth that softened the air and blurred the edges of the cold tile floor. The hallway lights had gone dim an hour ago, leaving behind this one golden-lit corner of Springwell Academy where silence wasn't a punishment. It was the permission I needed to become myself. I moved on instinct, hands rinsed, apron tied, sleeves rolled with practiced care. The stainless steel bowls caught reflections of the overhead lights like pools of mercury. Every motion was part of a ritual, the way I measured the oats by weight instead of scoops, how I tilted the honey bottle to catch the last drizzle, and the cinnamon. Exactly 1 3/4 pinches. More than that, and it would overpower the aftertaste. Less, and it would vanish behind the glaze. They weren't just snacks, they were a system. Wren bites, though I'd never called them that aloud, not to anyone. They weren't made for names or praise, they were how I spoke in a school where everyone else shouted. Outside the door, I could still hear echoes of laughter down the main hallway. Lana's voice, high and bright, rang through the air like a chime that never stopped swinging. I didn't look up. I kept folding the batter. Soft centers, crisp edges, let them talk. Then the door clicked open. "I thought we were meeting here," came Lana's voice, coated in casual charm. "Or am I early?" She wasn't. She was 40 minutes late. I glanced up. She stood in the doorway like she'd stepped out of a student magazine. Hair effortlessly tousled, cardigan hanging off one shoulder in that way that looked accidental, but never was. She carried nothing. No notebook, no apron, only her phone and that permanent pageant winner smile. "Started," I said simply, nodding toward the tray. She sauntered in, eyes sweeping the room like she owned the air in it. Her gaze landed on the bowl, then the recipe card I'd left near the scale. She moved closer, far too close, but still said nothing about the time. "You really made these?" she asked, voice tilting up like she was both surprised and impressed. "You're like a genius hiding in plain sight." My spoon scraped the bowl gently, the batter released with a quiet sigh. I didn't answer right away. I focused on shaping the mixture into clusters with clean lines and gentle hands. "They're not for show," I replied finally, my voice quieter than I intended. Lana leaned in, elbows on the table. Her phone rested beside the recipe card, camera lens angled downward in a way she probably thought I wouldn't notice. I did. "Well, they should be," she murmured, grinning at me. Her tone was light, her presence heavier. "You could make a fortune with these." I didn't reply, because what was I supposed to say? That fortune never interested me? That I liked silence more than applause? That something inside me always twisted when attention came with conditions? She doesn't get it. As she never will. The oven beeped, a soft tone. I moved quickly, slipping on mitts and pulling the tray out with practiced grace. Steam unfurled upward, fogging my glasses for a second. The oat clusters shimmered with golden edges, their scent warming the room like late autumn. Honey and cinnamon and effort baked into every bite. Lana leaned in again. "Seriously, though, these are unreal," she said, reaching for one. I hesitated, and then let her take it. She bit in, her eyes lit up, eyebrows raised in exaggerated delight. Crunchy on the outside, chewy inside. You're like Springwell's best-kept secret. I never asked to be kept. She didn't know that recipe took me 3 years to balance, that I'd ruined 20 batches trying to get the finish exactly right, that I'd tested them on classmates who couldn't explain what they liked, only that they wanted more. To her, it was a snack. To me, it was a quiet kind of belonging. She snapped a photo of the tray before I could stop her. Another habit she wore like perfume. "I'll tag you if I post," she said, licking her fingers. "These deserve followers." I nodded faintly, hiding the way my stomach clenched. The classroom clock ticked, louder. Every second, it reminded me how much time I gave to something no one ever saw. The contrast between Lana's effortless popularity and my deliberate, quiet hours hung heavy in the air, like steam that wouldn't lift. She doesn't care about the recipe, she cares about the applause. Still, I didn't say anything. Because Springwell didn't reward quiet truth, It celebrated packaging. And Lana? She was the whole package. Smile, pose, caption, and clout. I wiped the counter slowly, folding the towel in half. My hands were steady, but something inside me wasn't. She walked over to the sink, glancing at the recipe again. Her thumb tapped her phone screen once. I knew what that meant. I knew exactly what she'd saved. Then she smiled again, like we were friends. Group projects usually suck, she said, but I think this one's gonna be fun. I didn't reply. She waved her phone. I'll see you tomorrow? Yeah, I said, almost automatically. She was already out the door before the word had finished leaving my lips. The silence returned, thick and unforgiving. I stood in it for a long moment, watching the tray cool. The spoon in the bowl had stopped dripping. The room smelled like something finished. Sweet and warm and strangely sad. She doesn't see it as theft. She sees it as charm. I looked at the recipe card one last time, folded it carefully, slid it into my notebook where it wouldn't be left behind again. Somewhere in my chest, a flicker began. Not rage. Not pain. Something sharper, quieter, something that would wait. The kind of flame you build not to burn but to bake. And it never forgets its recipe. The hallway outside the gym buzzed with activity. Too many voices overlapping, too many colors clashing in posters taped to walls. I walked slower than usual, notebook hugged close to my chest, sleeves pushed halfway up. The scent hit first. Sugar melting, flour baked to golden. Then came the noise, laughter, camera shutters, the unmistakable rhythm of Lana's voice volleying between compliments. I rounded the corner into the gym, and the fluorescent lights crashed down like stage spotlights. Tables had been lined up in uneven rows, draped in checkered cloths. Bright banners dangled from the rafters. Springwell Bake Sale. Student talent on display. I had never intended to stay long. I wasn't showcasing anything. I came to support the culinary club. That's what I told myself. You came to see if she'd actually do it. And there they were, front row, dead center. 2 trays stacked high with my oat clusters. A few slight changes, larger portions, extra cinnamon dusting for drama, but I knew the layering of texture, the honey glaze catching light, my recipe, my process, now under someone else's name. A crooked paper sign rested beside the tray, Morel Bites. The font was too bold, the ink bleeding at the edges, like it had been printed in a rush and taped on as an afterthought. I didn't move at first. Across the gym, Lana was posing with 2 cheerleaders, a tray of the clusters balanced on one arm like a crown. Her cardigan sleeves were pushed up in that perfect half roll she always did, gold hair caught in soft curls. Glossed lips parted into light with every click of a camera. She looked radiant and untouchable. She didn't even bother to change the shape. A boy walked past, took one from the tray, and gave a dramatic moan. These are insane. She should bottle them. Someone else snapped a photo. Lana waved over her shoulder, never once looking at the table itself, only at the reactions. My feet carried me forward, slow and steady like I was sleepwalking. Every step made the gym feel louder. The sugar-coated praise scraped like static against my skin. Then she saw me. Her smile didn't falter. If anything, it brightened. Well, if it isn't my favorite lab partner, she sang, stepping toward me with her hands wide open. Her perfume drifted before she did, light, floral, calculated. Aren't they gorgeous? My eyes flicked the tray. The glaze glistened under the lights, catching reflections like a mirror. Everything inside me felt suspended. My ribs, my breath, my voice. You used my recipe, I said, voice low, controlled. Lana tilted her head, that same coy tilt she always used when she needed the room to bend. Our recipe, she corrected smoothly, brushing a curl behind her ear. You left it on the table, remember? Public domain, Elsby. She smiled wider. Her voice was syruped with innocence. Her eyes were sharp, watching me, daring me. The gym lights felt colder now, even though the oven heat still lingered near the bake tables. My fingers curled around the edge of my notebook. She hadn't just stolen it, she'd transformed it into performance. Her tray was a stage. Her tray was a theft recast as theater. I looked down at the label again. Morel Bites. Not even subtle. Thanks for the collab, she added playfully, reaching past me to straighten the paper sign. I mean, I did tweak the cinnamon, and obviously I styled them better, but you gave me the bones. Bones? That's what it was to her. Something to strip, repaint, and claim. Someone from the debate team shouted across the gym, asking if she'd take pre-orders. Lana gave a flirty laugh and a thumbs up, then turned back to me with an expression that might have once passed for affection if you didn't know how she used her eyes. I'll tag you if I post, she said. Don't worry. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't form. Not because I lacked them, but because I understood what this place did to truth. If I said it aloud, if I named the theft, I would be bitterness incarnate. The girl who couldn't handle someone else getting applause, the quiet one who couldn't share. My silence in this setting was safer than my honesty. Lana stepped back, phone in hand, angling it toward the tray for another perfect shot. Her reflection shimmered in the glaze. For a second, our eyes met in the screen. She didn't blink. I turned away before the shutter clicked. The edges of the gym blurred. The crowd buzzed like insects now. My throat itched with heat that never rose to tears. I made it to the hallway before my hands began to tremble. You shouldn't have left the card out. The thought landed hard. Then it twisted. You shouldn't have trusted silence to protect you. I found an empty classroom, sat down, let the cool desk metal bite into my palm until the shaking stopped. Outside the glass panel, Lana laughed again, her voice slicing through space with perfect resonance. She thinks she won, and maybe she did. For now, because I had made one mistake, thinking that protecting something meant hiding it. I pressed my notebook against my chest. The recipe was still inside, unaltered, untouched. Mine. On the table, not in a photo, not a brand, a truth. And I would never leave it unguarded again. The stage lights were angled too sharply, so even from the back of the auditorium, I could see how they shimmered off the silver detailing on Lana's blouse. Her hair had been curled tighter than usual, polished into soft spirals that bounced as she tilted her head toward the microphone. I sat in the farthest row, row H, seat 12, where the light didn't reach and where my presence could dissolve without resistance. One leg crossed neatly over the other, hands folded beneath my coat sleeves. I hadn't unzipped it despite the warmth inside, the lining pressed against me like armor. In my bag, untouched and neatly wrapped in wax paper, sat a single Ren bite, the original version, not the oversweetened replica Lana had fed to the judges. The award ceremony had started late. A string quartet played something that sounded like pretense stretched into harmony. The principal gave a short speech about culinary creativity, about tradition and originality, and the honor of representing Springwell at the interschool level. Any tradition? Then why did she need my handwriting? When they finally announced the winner, the crowd erupted before the name even fully left the announcer's lips. Lana Myrell. Applause thundered through the auditorium like a wave crashing over concrete. A standing ovation rippled forward. Students, staff, parents. Some were already pulling out their phones. I didn't move. Stage, Lana smiled like the lights had been made for her. She moved with the ease of someone born for spotlights, as if the world had always been one long runway, and this was her final strut. A glittered sash had been draped over her shoulder. The trophy, polished, baroque, almost too large, was already in her hands before the clapping stopped. Then came the speech. These flavors, she began, voice smooth, tone polished like glass. They've been in my family for generations. My grandmother used to make a version of these snacks when I was little, and I remember helping her in the kitchen. It's her memory I'm honoring today. The auditorium sighed collectively. My stomach nodded, not with jealousy, but with something heavier, something more permanent. She didn't flinch when she said it. No hesitation, not even a pause to betray the lie. Then why did you need my card? I sat perfectly still. Around me, parents whispered about her promise. Teachers murmured words like charming and refined. One student near me muttered, "She's gonna be on Food Network or something someday." My hand curled tighter inside my sleeve. She stood there as if the entire stage belonged to her lineage, the lights, the script, the credit, and what I had crafted in silence, measured and tested and reworked was now folklore in someone else's mouth. Lana's voice didn't waver. I leaned slightly forward, letting my eyes trace the way she held the trophy. Her fingers wrapped around the base like she had practiced the pose. The camera flashes sparked again. Her grin stretched just wide enough to feel permanent. And behind her, on the stage's corner banner, a projected slide read, "First place, Mirelle Bites, a family recipe." My snack sat untouched in my bag. I could still feel its warmth, faint but real. A truth no one would taste. I looked at the seat beside me. Empty. Of course it was. No one sat in the back row of ceremonies unless they wanted to disappear. She didn't win the competition, she won the room. There's a difference, and in Springwell, it was always the room that mattered more. A memory surfaced, then, of our group project when she first complimented my bites. The way her hand grazed the recipe card as I wiped down the counter. Her phone angled so slightly, screen catching the handwritten ink. It wasn't an accident, it never was. She had stolen with intention, not because she needed the idea, but because she needed the praise. And still, no one questioned it. Not the judges, not the crowd, not the faculty who'd tasted my work during club trials. They all saw Lana, not the recipe, not the story it came from. Because stories only mattered when the speaker was loud enough to be heard. The ceremony ended with a group photo, Lana in the center, flanked by two runners-up. Confetti cannons released soft streams of gold and maroon. The crowd surged forward for photos. I stood slowly, bag slung over my shoulder. I didn't clap. I didn't linger. My feet moved on their own, retracing a path I'd taken before. Out the side aisle, past the dusty curtain fold, through the emergency exit door that led to the staff lot. The night air hit harder than expected. My breath came in fogged puffs. I walked the rest of the way home. The streets were quiet. No headlights, no music, only the rhythmic crunch of my steps over fallen leaves and my thoughts trailing behind me like loose threads. I wasn't heartbroken. Not really. There were no tears that night, no fists pounding pillows or dramatic calls to a friend. Instead, I reviewed everything in my head, like a tape on slow rewind. Recipe card left out, phone angled, compliments timed to distract, the bake sale, the photo, the renaming, the speech. Each moment slid into place. Meredith grief. A strategy. She had played the room, the judges, the audience. I had played the recipe. Next time, I would design for the system, not against it. The steam rose in slow spirals, blurring the edges of the cafeteria's steel counters like breath on a mirror. By 6:45 a.m., the kitchen felt like a world separate from the rest of Springwell, a place where nothing needed to be spoken loudly, and things earned meaning through repetition, not recognition. I stood at the far end of the prep station. Gloves on, apron already dusted with flour. A half-filled industrial tray rested before me, its aluminum surface slick with condensation. I was folding pre-cut parchment sheets to line the bases. My fingers moved with muscle memory. My silence was unremarkable here. No one noticed me. But I noticed everything. The ovens, for instance, hummed at different volumes. One whined slightly when pushed past 375 DGF. The mixers tilted unevenly. The walk-in fridge had a soft leak near the vegetable shelf, and someone always restacked the bags of carrots too high, causing bruising at the bottom layers. These were the quiet truths of this place, the overlooked constraints that shaped outcomes more than flair ever did. A timer buzzed. One of the staff, Mara, moved briskly past me with a set of cooling racks. She didn't glance my way, but she didn't need to. They were starting to accept that I was there, not as a guest, not as a student, as part of the system. It had taken weeks. I'd asked to volunteer at the start of winter term, while Lana was still basking in her championship glow. scheduling interviews with the school newsletter and handing out Mirel bites like business cards. I hadn't confronted her. I didn't need to anymore. I was building something else. The first few mornings, the staff had looked at me with polite confusion. "You sure you want to be here at dawn?" the head cook had asked, arms folded over her apron. "I'm not here to decorate," I had replied without flinching. "I'm here to scale." The cafeteria manager, Miss Hale, had tilted her head, then nodded once. "You've got sharp eyes. Fine, don't get in the way." That had been enough. Since then, I'd observed the rules no one wrote down. I learned which trays warped after too many washes, how bulk cinnamon clumped differently from the delicate tin I used at home. I saw how steam lines made certain batches too soft. I started asking questions. How much salt could be reduced before flavor collapsed? How many days ingredients could sit before the oils turned bitter? They noticed eventually, not with praise, with space, the kind of space you give someone who's proving they understand the stakes. One morning, as I sliced apples for a compote, Miss Hale leaned over and said, "You're not like the other students." I glanced up. She wasn't smiling, but her tone had changed. "I don't need extra credit," I told her. "I need context. I'm rebuilding something." She nodded once, then passed me a worn binder. The cover was torn, the plastic yellowed. Inside were scaled-down versions of institutional recipes, adjusted over decades. I flipped through them slowly, letting the flour-dusted pages graze my fingertips. This was what I'd been missing. The real recipe wasn't a list of steps. It was adaptation. That night, I rewrote mine. I spread out my old notebook and taped up a blank sheet inside my locker. Ingredient by ingredient, I adjusted the ratios. I tested shelf-stable substitutions. I ran calorie calculations. I even adjusted the glaze to maintain texture after overnight refrigeration. My pen never lifted until every variable felt accounted for. It wasn't revenge. It was architecture. A recipe that could survive mass production, inconsistency, student budgets, and still taste like warmth. Still taste like me. I began running test batches before school, using cafeteria leftovers. Ms. Hale watched silently as I portioned them into new molds, baked them in batches of 60 instead of 6. I wasn't perfect, some burned, some flattened, but I kept going. Every failed tray taught me more than Lana's trophy ever could. Sometimes, after the bell rang and the halls filled with the noise I'd escaped, I would slip back into the prep area just to breathe in the quiet. The scent of flour, the hum of refrigerators, the soft scrape of trays on metal racks. It grounded me. One afternoon, Mara handed me a sealed box. "Store these on the back shelf. And Ren?" I turned. She wiped her hands on a towel and gave a nod I hadn't seen before. Not approval, recognition. "You've got a head for it. Keep at it." I held the box tighter as I walked away. It was the first time my name had been said here without question marks or assumptions. No title, no gossip, just acknowledgement. I taped the final version of the revised ingredient list inside my locker. The paper was smudged, the ink slightly faded. I reread it before every morning shift. And across campus, Lana posted another photo, a shot of her holding a new version of Morel Bites, this time arranged in gold foil with a quote about legacy in the caption. She didn't know that legacy had a shelf life, and mine was being sealed step by step into something untouchable. The notice went up on a Tuesday morning, a single printed flyer taped unevenly to the bulletin board near the student lounge. Cafeteria revamp initiative. 1 stud into disc will be permanently added to the Springwell menu. A rising square, healthy, scalable, original. Submissions due Friday. Line tasting panel. No names, only flavor. I stood in front of the flyer longer than I needed to. The hallway moved behind me, lockers slamming shut, students laughing into their phones, backpacks dragging lazily over linoleum, but I didn't hear any of it. My gaze lingered on one word: original. The echo of Lana's voice still lived in my mind from that first bake sale. "Thanks for the collab." My jaw tightened. I hadn't spoken to her since the competition, hadn't looked directly at her in weeks. She moved through the school like a winner who'd already printed the story. But this time, the script wasn't hers to write. No lights, no followers, no names, only taste. At lunch, I walked past her table without glancing sideways. She was surrounded by friends, all wearing variations of soft beige and pastel blue, the Springwell color wheel for the socially fluent. Lana leaned back in her chair, elbow draped carelessly, long ponytail swaying like punctuation. Honestly, she said to no one in particular, loud enough for proximity to feel intentional, it's basically guaranteed. Everyone knows I own the bake space. They laughed. One of the girls asked, "Are you entering the same recipe you won with?" Lena smiled with teeth. Morel bites? Obviously. You don't mess with a classic. Classic? You mean the one you didn't create? I kept walking. That evening, I went to the cafeteria long after it had closed. Miss Hale unlocked the side door without a word. I nodded once in thanks and set up Station B near the commercial mixers. The air smelled like neutral soap and faint lemon, clean, stripped of noise. Wore my black apron, the one with the stitched hem I'd repaired myself. I pulled my latest batch from the cooling rack and let it rest exactly 13 minutes, enough time for structural integrity without compromising softness. I portioned them with gloved fingers, sealed the serving tray, and slid the entry form beneath it. Honey cluster cinnamon squares. Submission ID, W. Elsby. I didn't tell anyone I entered. I didn't ask for opinions or test audiences. I had already tested them dozens of times, across temperature shifts, against budget constraints, through every logistical failure the industrial kitchen had thrown at me. These weren't for applause, they were for permanence. Friday came like a held breath. In the faculty lounge, converted for the tasting event, 6 judges sat at a long table. 3 staff, 1 nutritionist, 2 students. They wore plain aprons over their clothes and held identical scoring sheets. The room smelled like roasted oats, fruit, and vanilla extract clinging to steam. 5 desserts were submitted, each labeled by code, each portioned into sample trays. I arrived before Lana, watched the judges taste my submission forth. No smiles, no remarks, their expressions unreadable. The head nutritionist made a single note in the margin. Eyes narrowed, then nodded slightly to himself. Then dessert 5 was presented. Lana entered the room like a light switch had been flipped. Hair curled, sweater immaculate, holding her sample tray like it was a luxury product in soft gold wrappers. She gave a little wave to the student judges. Morel bites. I mean, technically entry 5, she corrected, like the anonymity rule was a formality she could flirt past. One of the staff reminded her not to address the panel. She smiled like she hadn't heard. Stood along the back wall, arms folded, watching her. She set the tray down gently, then stepped back. Her fingers hovered in midair as the judges reached for her samples. I could see Enk, her right hand tapping a rhythm against her thigh. 3 beats, pause, 3 again. Lana Morelli only did that when she was uncertain. The judges tasted. One tilted her head and took a second bite. Another cleared his throat and moved on. No one reacted aloud. This time, they'll only taste the truth. Across the room, Lana turned to catch my eye. She offered a half smile, her trademark, the one that smoothed every lie like it was meant to be admired. I didn't return it. I didn't need to. They'd already tasted the difference. I stayed until the samples were cleared, until the judges folded their scorecards and slipped them into the locked file box. The results wouldn't be announced until the following week. On my way out, I passed Lana in the hallway. She didn't stop me. She didn't need to. Her fingers were still tapping. The rollout happened without ceremony. No banner, no student council announcement, no staff-wide email bursting with emojis and exclamation marks. Just a quiet Tuesday, the kind that didn't ask to be remembered. I noticed first. Not because someone told me, but because the scent hit differently when I walked into the cafeteria. It wasn't loud, not cloying or artificial like most of the vendor-provided snacks. This was softer, toasted oats, a ribbon of cinnamon, warmth tucked beneath steel trays, familiar in a way that made the back of my throat tighten. I paused near the tray line, heart steady, eyes searching. There it was. Far right. Next to the fruit cups and under the heat lamps, laid in perfect rows, golden and firm, the shape unmistakable. My batch, my bake. The version I'd scaled, refined, tested in silence until it stopped falling apart. Above it, held in a clear plastic sign stand. Honey Cluster Cinnamon Squares, W. Elsby. The letters weren't bolded, they didn't need to be, they didn't shout, they simply were. And people picked them up. A girl in a blue scarf nudged her friend, murmuring, "These taste like the ones from the bake sale, right?" Another nodded, mid-bite, cheeks full and eyes slightly widened. Across the room, 2 members of the soccer team added them to their trays without hesitation. They didn't look for who made them. They didn't ask questions. They didn't know I was there. I sat at my usual seat, back corner, near the window where the sunlight always hit crooked around noon, and watched the line stretch past the dessert station. My tray sat untouched. I didn't need to taste them. I had already lived every version of those bites. When they were stolen, when they were improved, and now when they stood on their own. I saw her before she saw me. Lana entered with her usual rhythm, heels clicking softly against the linoleum, hair pulled into a ribboned ponytail that swayed in slow sync with her stride. She was laughing with someone, something about cheer practice, the conversation weightless and rehearsed. Then she reached the line. At first, she didn't react. Picked up a tray, glanced at the food like it bored her. But then, there was a pause, a longer second. Her hand hovered over the dessert section, fingers splayed like she was choosing which version of herself to perform. She picked one up, turned it in her hand slowly, eyes narrowing. Then she saw the label. W. Elsby. It was as if a gust of cold wind sliced through the cafeteria. Not real, just the illusion of it, the shift in her body. Her smile flattened, her jaw tensed. I watched her grip the square tighter, the tips of her fingers whitening around the edges of the parchment. She didn't move, didn't eat it, didn't blink. She scanned the room once, searching. Then her gaze landed on me. The moment hung. Not heavy, not explosive. It wasn't war, it was recognition, the kind that stings deeper than any slap or scream. She blinked once. Her lips parted slightly, like she might speak, but nothing came out. Her tray lowered. She turned away. 20 minutes later, I stepped out into the hallway to breathe. My coat was still slung over one arm. The echo of the lunch bell hadn't faded when I heard her voice behind me. "It tastes familiar, you know?" I didn't turn right away. When I did, she was standing there, alone, for once, her expression unreadable. She still held the dessert in her hand, still uneaten. I looked at her, really looked. The way her posture shifted between tension and performance. The way her fingers wouldn't release their hold. The way her eyes demanded denial and feared confirmation in the same second. I stepped closer, just one step, close enough for the space between us to feel real. "Because you've tasted them before," I said quietly, "but never earned them." Her mouth twitched. Maybe she wanted to smile, maybe she wanted to spit something cruel. She didn't. She stayed silent, and for once, that silence belonged to me. I walked past her without waiting for a reply, down the hall toward the east wing. The late bell rang, but it sounded distant, muffled like footsteps through snow. She knows now, and she can't undo it. I didn't need her confession. I didn't need an apology wrapped in social damage control. I didn't need her to admit what we both knew. The recipe had come home, through the front door, and this time with my name intact. The sound of the cafeteria had changed. It wasn't louder or quieter. It simply didn't press against me anymore. The laughter, the trays clattering against steel, the chairs dragging across linoleum, all of it moved past me like a breeze through tall grass. Background, not resistance. I sat at my usual spot near the window, hands resting calmly around a folded napkin. My fingers moved gently across its seams, crease, fold, turn, like muscle memory threading quiet into every motion. Across the room, students picked up their desserts without glancing at the name. They didn't have to. It was printed clearly on the tray label now, permanent, not highlighted, not marketed, but there WLSB, right beneath honey cluster cinnamon squares, like it had always belonged. The buzz in the room was ordinary. That was the most extraordinary part. They weren't talking about me, they weren't debating the origin, they weren't holding up their phones to snap filtered shots. They were eating. That's what legacy is, I thought. Not the noise, the presence. Mrs. Hale passed by with her clipboard tucked under her arm, glancing briefly toward the dessert tray before dropping a new batch of lunch forms at the main counter. She caught my gaze as she turned and tilted her head in quiet acknowledgement. "You really don't want credit?" she asked as she stopped beside my table, tone not skeptical, curious. I looked up at her. Her apron was dusted in flour, her hair pulled back into a clean knot streaked with steam. There was no audience here. No performance. "I already have it," I answered. My voice didn't rise. "They eat it every day." Her eyes softened. Not admiration, not praise. Recognition. She nodded and walked on without another word. Across the room, Lana sat at a different table now. She didn't bring samples anymore. She hadn't posted since the rollout. Her signature laugh had quieted. Still there, still intact, but lower. Rehearsed, it carried less. Her friends still circled her, but their smiles flickered now, unsure of what they were orbiting. She never submitted another recipe. She didn't need to. I had already erased the version of her that thrived on taking. I never asked for an apology. I didn't need her to crumble or admit defeat in a hallway. What I wanted was already done. A shift, a recalibration of what this school remembered. Springwell used to applaud performance. Now I archived truth. In the faculty office, a clean copy of my recipe lived in the culinary records, formatted with nutritional breakdowns and shelf stability notes, filed under W. Ellsby in black ink. No annotations from anyone else, no alterations allowed without written request. It didn't sit behind glass, it wasn't spotlighted in a case. It was functional, protected, in circulation. That's the win. People had started referencing me differently too. I heard it once during a class trip to the greenhouse, someone from the year below asking, "Isn't she the one who got on the cafeteria menu?" No Instagram link, no quote. Just that, and that was more than enough. I folded the napkin again. The motion had become a ritual, like baking used to be. I didn't bake often anymore, not here, not where it could be watched. The silence of the industrial kitchen had done something to me, retrained me to value what outlived applause. Across the room, Lana looked up. Her gaze passed over the room like a scan, then stopped on me. She didn't hold her tray like a prop anymore. Today, she sat with her hands in her lap. The dessert had been left on her plate, untouched again. Our eyes held for a moment. She didn't flinch, neither did I. We both knew what had happened. Not in words, not in the way students usually processed rivalry or gossip. This was quieter, heavier. She had taken something she couldn't sustain and watched it live longer in someone else's hands. That truth didn't need to be shouted. It only needed to stay. I rose, sliding my chair back gently, collecting my tray. Before I walked out, I glanced back at the serving line. A new batch had been placed under the lamps, steam curled slowly around the edges. Beside it, the label hadn't moved. Honey Cluster Cinnamon Squares WL. Fixed, not spotlighted. Stamped into routine. I stepped out into the hall as another wave of students poured in, their voices layered over one another like fabric, soft, textured, unaware of the small systems that shape their day. That's what I'd become, quietly. Or a system. And systems don't need applause to last. The walls of Springwell hadn't changed. Same muted blue lockers, same cracked tiles near the science wing, same morning announcements barely audible over the static-ridden speaker system. And yet, walking those hallways during my final week, everything felt smaller. Not diminished, settled. Time had pressed its hands around the school's pulse and slowed it into something rhythmic. predictable. There were new faces now. First years with wide eyes and untamed confidence trailing laughter through the halls like they had somewhere urgent to be. They hadn't been there for Lana's reign. They hadn't seen the bake sale, the trophy, the turning of something sharp into something still. To them, Springwell had always been this version. Calmer. Calibrated. I passed one of them at lunch, a girl with thick glasses and a green hoodie too big for her frame. She sat cross-legged on the edge of a bench, elbows balanced on the table as she took her first bite of the honey cluster cinnamon square. You didn't speak? She chewed slowly, then exhaled through her nose, eyes softening. She smiled. Not to anyone. Not for attention, a private smile. The kind you give to comfort, or memory, or self. She doesn't know who I am. That thought didn't ache. It settled somewhere deeper, beneath pride, beneath ego. She doesn't know, and the dessert is still enough. Across the cafeteria, the trays were replenished like clockwork, the same row, the same label. Honey Cluster Cinnamon Squares W. Ellsby. The label had aged, the ink had started to fade a little along the edges. Someone had taped the corners again, this time with clear strips to keep them from peeling. It looked lived in. I folded my napkin beside my tray, watching the kitchen staff behind the glass. Mara still manned the back oven. Miss Hale leaned over her clipboard, arguing softly with a delivery vendor. They'd never made a show of it, but they never let my batch skip rotation. Even on days with special menus or external vendors, that tray was there. Quiet. Warm. Permanent. I hadn't submitted a yearbook quote. I wasn't nominated for anything, no superlatives, no best smile, most artistic, most likely to succeed. My photo would be somewhere near the back, row 4, top corner. Eyes open, expression unreadable. That's okay. Springwell didn't need to remember my voice to keep my presence. I walked the halls one last time during my free period, past the archive room, where I knew my recipe lived in a clear sleeve between laminated policies and cafeteria standards. I touched the metal edge of the filing cabinet as I passed, a silent goodbye. Lana was still here too. I saw her sometimes, always surrounded, always composed, but she never reached for the dessert anymore. And when her friends mentioned it in passing, "This is so good. Did Lana make these?" she would smile and say nothing. Not denial, not confession, just silence, brittle and practiced. That was the last layer of victory, not in her downfall, but in the way she quietly stepped back. My legacy wasn't written in defiance, it had been designed to outlast names, to outlast gossip, to outlast theft. That afternoon, I stood by the serving line longer than I usually did. I watched another tray be placed under the heat lamps. Steam curled off the edges in ribbons, dancing like memories rising from warm parchment. The glow from the lamp haloed the tray in soft gold. A new batch, same smell, same balance. Same taste. The student in line didn't look at the label before taking one. None of them did anymore. They don't have to, because it had become part of the place, a tradition not built by announcement but repetition, served again and again until it felt inevitable. And that was more powerful than any award or headline. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about contribution. I didn't linger for the afternoon bell. I left through the side door near the faculty lot, the same one I had slipped through after the bake sale so many months ago. The light had changed. It was warmer now, stretched longer across the sidewalk. My shadow moved slowly beside me, calm and sure, no longer chased by what was taken. I stopped for a moment, letting the breeze carry the scent of fresh bread from the back kitchen. And I smiled. Soft. Small. Enough. They don't have to remember me. Just the taste. That's enough.